Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Enyekolo. My guest today is Professor Bolaji Akinyemi, known popularly as the bow tie diplomat because of, as you might have guessed, his trademark bow tie. But beyond his sartorial style, there is so much more to the man. At the age of 27, he already had a doctorate degree. At 33, he became the Director General of the famous and hugely respected Nigerian Institute of International Affairs. He became a full professor at 41, and 2 years later, aged 43, he became Nigeria's External Affairs Minister and took his seat as a participant in the maelstrom of the interactions of nations, as the Nation newspaper put it, traveling east and west, meeting heads of state, jousting in conferences and raising and validating Nigeria's international profile. And of course, through it all, wearing that trademark professorial bow tie, almost but not quite as a way of broadcasting an aggressive lack of concern for what other people think and personifying Nigeria's enhanced sense of self-importance. And Professor Bolaji Akinyemi, Nigeria's former External Affairs Minister, is hopefully with me from Lagos. I hope you can see me, Professor. Thank you very much indeed for your patience, and I apologize sincerely and profusely for the technical gremlins that attacked our system just as we were getting ready to talk to you. But in the introduction, at the outset, not this immediate one, we talked about your idea of the black bomb, perhaps your most controversial idea towards during your time as External Affairs Minister, when you advocated that Nigeria should join the nuclear race so that Africa could be in possession of what you called the black bomb. Many decades later, do you think that was the right call, and did you actually mean it, or was it just a way of getting global attention?
Thank you very much, Charles, for having me on your program. I really meant it at that time, and I still believe in it even now. Obviously, in our imperfect world of power play, being a nuclear power is the ultimate protection against intimidation, against whatever whatever you may call it, and also enhancing your power status in the global politics that we play. Apart from the United States that used it at the beginning, the nuclear bomb has not been used by any other power since then. But possession of it ensures your protection from intimidation by those who have it. Having nuclear power is not coterminous with having wisdom. No, wisdom really plays very little role in global politics. It is possession of power, and that's why the Power School, headed by Hans Morgenthau, of which probably the greatest player was Henry Kissinger, had proved beyond any shadow of doubt that you cannot be a peace-loving country and have influence and have respect and have recognition in international politics.
It's interesting that you say that, Professor, because I mean a lot of people would argue that there are many countries in the world that are very influential, but from an economic point of view. I mean, some countries, and if you look at countries like Germany and all the rest of it, quite a few countries are very influential, and that perhaps what Nigeria should concentrate on is developing its economy. And I know you got into that as well, because that was part of your concept of medium powers, but I wonder if you might want to sort of look at that.
Thank you very much for bringing that up. There is no doubt that economic parameters are part of what you factor into your power situation. Because of the politics arising from the outcome of the Second World War, Germany and Japan actually are still battling below their power status. But there's nobody in any doubt that if the self-imposed ceilings, and in the case of Japan, actually accentuated by the United States, if those were removed, I think, I'm not really sure whether it would take more than 2 years for both Japan and Germany to become nuclear powers. However, in spite of the economic status of Germany, Germany still needs the American umbrella in its existence with Russia on this same planet. And each time Russia kind of rattles, the cage, so to speak, or shows the claws of the Russian bear, NATO is activated. So in spite of the economic status of Germany, the military power is still the ultimate. And I will not, sacrifice the power status for the economic status as a protective actor or a protective factor in international relations. Yes, in terms of the economy, the United States has a powerful economy. Though Russia is giving it a run for its money, but why is the United States still pumping so much money into the defense sector? Under the last president, they even came up with a new sector, Unitelstar, quadrangle within the Pentagon, so that instead of what you had before, Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force, you now have another one. Why will America have to then go that far? How much is China pouring into its military sector, in spite of the fact that its economy needs more injection of funds? All we really need to, it's a matter of simple analysis, frankly, when one is battling between whether a country needs economic status or a country needs power status. The economy is part of the power projection. I wouldn't call on, and I don't want to offend any country on this program, but obviously in Africa, there are countries you will have to rule out because the economic status or the economic factors that they have simply will not sustain a nuclear or even a power status. It will not sustain it. So to that extent, I think what will worry me is if calling for Nigeria to be a nuclear power was whistling in the dark. Not for Nigeria. There's misapplication of funds, whether through corruption or through bad governance. But the resources are there to sustain having a nuclear program.
Okay, just spot on in terms of time there. Stay with us, Professor Akinyemi. We'll come right back to you. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our chat with Nigeria's former Minister of Foreign Affairs and former Director General of the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs, Professor Bolaji Akinyemi. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview, where we speak to the newsmakers as well as ordinary people doing extraordinary things around the world and featuring the voices at the heart of the stories. I'm Charles Aniekolo. My guest today is a former professor at Cambridge University in the UK and a former student at Oxford, Professor Bolaji Akinyemi, who eventually became Nigeria's External Affairs Minister. A brilliant scholar who wrote extensively about foreign policy and the art of diplomacy, Professor Akinyemi, finding Nigeria caught in the Cold War between the US and the Soviet Union and Africa's most populous nation not being a big enough player in the non-aligned movement, developed the now famous concept of medium powers because, as he reasoned, Nigeria was a medium power which at the time developed its own defense industry that was almost as significant as that of Brazil, for instance. Today, more than 35 years later, Nigeria can hardly produce a single rifle or a bomb and purchases virtually all its weaponry from abroad. So much for the concept of a medium power that inspired Professor Akinyemi to come up with not just the concept, but the idea of making a black nuclear bomb and overseeing the renaissance of the African warrior, with Nigeria as its arrowhead. And Professor Bolaji Akinyemi, Nigeria's former External Affairs Minister and former Director General of the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs, is still with me from Lagos. Thank you very much indeed for staying with us. And one of your many admirers wrote that though you served for only 2 years as External Affairs Minister, it was as if you were in office for 2 decades because of your impact on Nigeria's foreign policy. You developed, as we mentioned there, the concept of medium powers, which was aimed at making Nigeria become a global player among sort of developing nations. Just remind us of what that concept was and to what extent Nigeria embraced it.
Thank you for that question. During the Cold War, obviously, what helped to sustain the peace was the balance between the United States and the Soviet Union, or between the Western Bloc and the Eastern Bloc. And given the fact that neither was prepared to go to war, there will always be exceptions. The Vietnam War, in terms of the United States, and Afghanistan war with the Soviet Union. However, the main bulk of the globe was sustained by efforts with winks and nods, efforts of medium-range powers. At that time, if you wanted an illustration rather than a philosophical definition, look at the countries that the United Nations depended upon to run peacekeeping operations. Before Nigeria even became independent, already plans were in place for Nigeria to help maintain the peace, or to help create the peace in the Congo, what we now call the Democratic Republic of the Congo, so that the troops were on the ground from day one. And since then, there was hardly a United Nations peacekeeping operations, whether it was in India, on the border between India and Pakistan, or in Afghanistan, or in Kashmir, or name it, that Nigeria was not involved in. The same thing, you could talk about Canada, you could talk about India. So, to that extent, you did have countries that had the capability to help the United Nations in the maintenance of peace and security. Now, as the Soviet bloc collapsed and Russia became a shadow of its old self. I was worried at that time by the fear that a unipolar world, a world dominated by just one power, will be an unstable world. And that to that extent, there was now a need for a formalization. If you like, it wasn't a creation, a formalization of those countries that had been involved in maintenance of peace in their regional areas, and which together were involved in the maintenance of global peace. So that's really why I called it the concert of medium powers. So to that extent, it will when I say to checkmate, I don't mean that it will have the capability to face down the United States. No. But when it came to sustenance of peace in either the regional level or on the global level, these are then the countries that the United Nations Security Council could call upon to do what they had been doing before. So that's really why I came up with that concept. The United States was unhappy about it because they saw it as a challenge to their monopoly of global control. And there were other countries that were opposed because they were not included. The membership was rather restricted. It wasn't supposed to be, of course, formalized in stone. The membership could have been expanded at any time. But the one that was more worrisome was the opposition from home, the domestic front. That one was more worrisome to me because surprisingly, Nigeria had always had this, I don't know, conflict between the belief that it was one of the strongest powers on the African scene and the doubt that it could really fulfill this role. The intellectual opposition really surprised me because I thought they would embrace it. I mean, these were people who, in fact, if not perhaps for Obasanjo and Danjuma and Yaradua's pushback, would have encouraged us to go and fight a war against South Africa, to knock off apartheid from its tripod. But when it then came to this kind of new concept, they developed cold feet, metaphorically speaking. As regards Nigerian ability to do this, but I beat General Babangida, President Babangida at that time, embraced it. And he told me, well, go ahead. If you succeed, fine. But he provided the funds for us in the ministry to seek to actualize the concept. And the countries that we invited did join in. They did sign on to it. And one of the countries that surprised me, by the way, and even up till now I'm still trying to wrap my brains around that, was Switzerland. Because technically Switzerland shies away from membership in blocks in international politics. But it was invited and it signed on to it. Of course, after I was removed as a minister, actually I did serve for more than 2 years because I think I came on board August 85 and left last day of December 1987. So roughly 2 years and 3 months, which is about the average time that a Nigerian foreign minister survives, except Oyema, who is almost going to do 8 years there. And I congratulate him for that.
Well, I have to say, Professor Akinyemi, that's an absolutely fascinating analysis that you just gave there. And I mean, it's almost regretful that a country like Nigeria didn't embrace the concepts that you had further. I mean, I would wager, and that's purely a guess, that you were clearly intellectually far ahead conceptually of a lot of the other people who were your contemporaries. But you, as you said there, you were Nigeria's Minister for External Affairs for only 2 years, well, just over 2 years, from 1985 to the last day of 1987. And you're suggesting that you were pushed.
Oh, yes. There's no doubt about that. But my removal as a foreign minister is a long story that I'm not sure really needs to be told. I mean, after all, ministers come in and ministers go. But people also didn't realize that when I was removed, there were conversations going on about whether I should be moved to another ministry. And the talk up and down was that no, I wouldn't really accept the ministry they were talking about, but that the president should offer me permanent secretary at the United Nations. And he did. And I told him very politely, I rejected it very politely. Let's just leave it at that. He tried to sweeten it by saying I will have direct access to him and really that change. And I told him that, sir, there's nothing like an ambassador having direct access to you. At the end of the day, the minister is the boss in that ministry. And I wasn't going to go around creating problems for General Ike Wachuku, who succeeded me. I decided to get on the horse and right into the sunset, so to speak.
Well, I mean, let's be clear, you didn't exactly ride into the sunset. You must have stopped somewhere along the way because, I mean, your influence in politics and the democracy and all of that continued many years, and indeed in foreign policy, many years after you left office. But please stay with us, Professor Bolaji Akinyemi. Really interesting talking with you. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our chat with Nigeria's former Minister of Foreign Affairs and former Director General of the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs, Professor Bolaji Akinyemi. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Enyegolu. My guest today is the veteran Nigerian diplomat, Professor Bolaji Akinyemi, the country's former Minister of External Affairs and former Director General of the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs, who was once Nigeria's chief foreign policy architect. He helped to design and shape what is still today the main thrust of this country's foreign policy objective, the concentric rings of West Africa, Africa and the world, and who mobilized Nigeria's diplomatic influence globally on behalf of the continent when he became Foreign Affairs Minister in 1985. Not only did he define Nigeria's foreign policy in political, economic, social and security terms, he formulated strategies and instruments for their realization. It was known as the Akinyemi Doctrine, and to this day that doctrine helps to provide the framework within which Nigeria faces up to its regional and international obligations. And Professor Bolaji Akinyemi is still with me from Lagos. Thank you very much indeed, Professor, for staying with us. And as you look back at that era of military rule, and you reflect on the fact that you served in what was basically an authoritarian and undemocratic government, do you have mixed feelings?
No. I don't have mixed feelings. But please permit me, I need your permission, to round up something, one issue we were talking about, and I will then come back and explain my position on, well, a Democrat or a scholar serving in a regime of the man in uniform on the horseback. One factor which complicates policy, whether formulation or execution, whether on the foreign field or in the domestic field, is what I will call this conspiracy theory syndrome in Nigeria. Believe me, Nigerian scholars, technocrats, media moguls, analysts, columnists will give Trump a run for its money when it comes to using the conspiracy theory to try to explain issues and policies that they don't understand. While almost emotionally they applauded the ECOMOG initiatives, they still then tended to come down on the fact that there must be something strange or something IBB was gaining or the military was gaining from intervention in Sierra Leone and Liberia, even when it was so obvious what they sought to prevent in those areas. And the extension of, if you like, the ECOMOG syndrome has extended to Ivory Coast, has extended to Mali, has extended to Guinea-Bissau. And I have also seen these same scholars explain the setting up by the Americans of the American African Command as a reaction to the capability of Nigeria to mount the ECOMOG operations without their support, without consulting with them. So I really can't understand for the life of me then what a country is then supposed to do when you are faced with a conspiracy syndrome from the constituency where you are expecting intelligent criticism if there was going to be one. Number two, after Abacha got to power, he and I had a very interesting and fascinating conversation. He explained that for domestic and internal military politics, why he proved difficult on the ECOMOG operations. But he then said to me, he found nothing wrong with Nigeria becoming a nuclear power. And what he wanted me to do, which I turned down, the reason for that will be for another day, showed that he really meant it. And I just wondered if Abacha had lived longer in office, if the circumstances had been different. I think that Abacha, General Murtala Mohammed, might have actually embarked on a nuclear development program. So I just thought that I should round that up. Now, in terms of my service there, what I would really say is that most of the eminent Nigerians who have come onto the national scene since independence had for one reason or the other, ended up serving the military. Chief Awolowo did, Aminu Kano did, Azikwe did, although on Ojuku's side for a while. I mean, Professor Likoye Ransom Kuti did, Professor Jibrin Aminu did, Oje, Professor Aboyade, Professor Mabogunje were all part of this really heavily empowered, well, call it think tank. People will understand that. That was helping the Babangida regime in terms of developing strategies and options for national development. I think we went through a period when, in spite of the circumstances under which the military came to power, the military was regarded as an agent of change and an agent of development.
Okay, let me just, I hate to interrupt you, Professor, but we've got about 3 minutes, less than 3 minutes. We've actually got less than 3 minutes left.
All right.
Sadly, we lost 15 minutes at the beginning of the program when we lost your connection. But I just want to bring things a bit closer to the present, because of course you went on not only with the military, you served, you were the face of NADECO internationally, you helped to restore democracy to Nigeria in 1999, and then so a decade, just more than a decade later, you served as deputy chairman of the Constitutional Conference that was set up by President Goodluck Jonathan. What was the main recommendation of that conference, and why do you think it's been cast aside by the current government of President Buhari?
Well, the main recommendation was restructuring of Nigeria, which everybody has embraced. Even those who say they don't understand what it is, everybody now believes that the center is overloaded. It has become inefficient, and everybody has bought into the doctrine that local issues are better managed at the local level. This is the doctrine of subsidiarity. And that unless you just want to hold on to power for power's sake, you need to decentralize in Nigeria. Basic. That is what the result came out of. The result of the conference and the main recommendation of the conference. The reason it's been pushed aside has nothing to do with the rationality behind the resolutions and the recommendations that we came up with. You and I know what is going on in the country right now. You know what had led to a country that is in tatters and in pieces.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave that for another day. I really apologize, Professor Akinyemi, but we're out of time. Professor Bolaji Akinyemi was the former Nigerian Minister of External Affairs. That's it for this edition of the Arise interview. Join us again tomorrow. From me and the entire team here in Abuja and Lagos, bye-bye, and thank you for watching.